I'm not going to say anything until somebody arrives because I want to test my audio levels. But I suppose I could be waiting for a long time now that YouTube is actively suppressing my channel by shadow banning me and not sending my notifications out. I still see only 0 concurrent viewers. I don't think it can be so bad if it were not for YouTube taking action against me, which I'm going to interpret as a sign of success, but that I have obviously streamed enough to make them want to shadow ban me. So I'm going to try this audio out myself, and I'm going to be speaking at the same volume, and then I will maybe lower it so you can, or you will hear me less. I'm lowering the audio level, and then I'm going to increase it, and then on another thing, I don't even know what to call it, I'm going to lower the audio level, going to raise it again. How is that? Does it work? There's nobody, 1 concurrent viewer. So, will you tell me if it's working or not? Shall I sing or something? So I'm going to go down and up, and I'm going to go down and up. So that's all the playing on the audio levels that you're going to get, and I'm now going to get to the meat of the stream, which is about the Goa Inquisition. It's a book. This is well, according to Wikipedia, well, should I read the Wikipedia entry on the Goa Inquisition? I think that's better if I read the Goa Inquisition started in 1561, was disbanded in 1812, an extension of the Catholic religion. Portuguese Inquisition started early in 1536 and dragged past 1812 until 1831 in geographical Portuguese India territory from 1505 to 1961. In 1510, Alfonso de Albuquerque captured Goa from the Bijapur Sultan with the aid of the Hindu privateer Timoja, leading to the establishment of a permanent settlement in the city of Vela. Goa was a geographical boundary with historical rule preceding Portuguese Inquisition. Goa Island, initially Ilhas Island in Portuguese, bore the site of the capital and the seat of the viceroy, who governed all the Portuguese possessions in Asia. Goa was annexed from Portuguese in 1961, while British India emerged under British rule in 1947. As India, other countries were also formed. Pakistan and renamed as Bangladesh, as well as Myanmar. These facts are material in the understanding of Goa Inquisition in Goa under Portuguese India, and Goa Inquisition religious history does not overlap with territorial boundaries of Goa. India timelines. Oh dear, this is Very badly written, isn't it? I think we'll have to read the Britannica one. At least it'll be grammatical and make sense. So this is a story about Francis Xavier. How did St. Francis Xavier shape Catholicism? Beyond the lasting cultural impact of having baptized tens of thousands of converts throughout Asia, St. Francis Xavier utilized several unique approaches in his ministry that would ultimately influence Roman Catholic missionary strategy for generations. He is credited with the idea that missionaries must adapt to the customs and language of the people they evangelize, and he was known to advocate friendship as a means to bridge cultural differences. He was renowned for his kindness and sincerity, and his charisma and reputation for good deeds enabled him to foster key relationships with a variety of figures, including King John III of Portugal, tribal leaders in the Malay archipelago. I'm sorry, I just have this difficulty in pronouncing this word. Political figures in India and Japan, and the many common people with whom he directly worked. Unlike other missionaries who often swept through an area and left converts with little training beyond baptism, St. Francis Xavier strongly believed that new Christian communities should not be abandoned. In India, he trained European missionaries to continue his work and hoped that his missions would grow with seminaries, schools, and charities. Indian converts were often from the lower caste and were subject to Portuguese abuse and local persecution, and he worked to gain civil protections for them from both Portuguese and Indian authorities. However, his actions in India were not without controversy, as he was involved with the establishment of the Goan Inquisition, which punished converts accused of continuing to practice Hinduism or other religions. Well, that's terrible, isn't it? In Japan, he radically sought to perpetuate the faith with educated native clergy. He had hoped to do the same in China, but died before he could gain entry. Given that European superiority was taken for granted by many in the West, the idea that Asian converts could celebrate Mass and administer the sacraments was revolutionary to many in Europe. Although Japanese Christians later suffered heavy persecution and were nearly extirpated, the communities established by St. Francis Xavier were deeply rooted for many years and were a testament to the dedication of the Japanese clergy who maintained them. So I wanted to learn a bit more about the Goan Inquisition, and we know that converts were punished if they were accused of continuing to practice Hinduism or other religions. It's a shame that the Wikipedia entry on the Goan Inquisition is too badly written for me to read it to you. Anyway, they were being mean to the converts. So the Inquisition laws made reconversion to Hinduism, Islam and Judaism, and the use of indigenous Konkani language and Sanskrit, a criminal offence. Although the Goa Inquisition ended in 1812, discrimination against Hindus under the Portuguese Christian rule continued in other forms, such as the Zendi tax implemented from 1705 to 1840, which was similar to the jizya tax. Religious discrimination ended with the introduction of secularism via the Portuguese Constitution of 1838 and the subsequent Portuguese Civil Code of Goa and Damoan. I guess the rest of it is not, of this Wikipedia entry is not too badly written. Perhaps it's even alright to read the slightly challenged English of the person who wrote it. The Portuguese came primarily for trading before the Portuguese Inquisition, and their secondary good disguise was Catholic religion, while their primary trading continued in broad daylight, just like other Euro-colonialism, including British. So obviously this is written by an Indian who has a gripe against the Portuguese and the British. Goa Inquisition. Secondary good disguise objective was to enforce Catholic orthodoxy and allegiance to the Apostolic See of Rome. The Inquisition primarily counted Hindus and New Christians accused of secretly practicing their former religions and Old Christians accused of involvement in the Protestant Revolution of the 16th century. It was established in 1560, briefly suppressed from 1774 to 1778, continued thereafter until finally abolished in 1812. Predominantly those targeted were accused of crypto-Hinduism. Those accused were imprisoned and, depending on the criminal charge, could even be sentenced to death if convicted. The inquisitors also seized and burnt any books written in Sanskrit, Dutch, English, or Konkani, on the suspicion that they contained deviationist or Protestant material. The aims of the Portuguese Empire in Asia were combating Islam, the spread of Christianity, and the trade of spices. The Portuguese were guided by missionary fervour and intolerance. Examples: the Madeira mission of Roberto de Nobili, nicknamed the White Brahmin, the Jesuit mission to the court of the Mughal Emperor Akbar. The Inquisition enforced subjection of the Syrian Church to the Roman Church at the Synod of Diamper in 1599. While some claim the Inquisition was requested by the Jesuit missionary Francis Xavier, no real evidence exists. Only a letter from Malacca in Malaysia dated 16th May 1546 to King John III of Portugal, which asked for a king's minister with powers to protect new converts from ill treatment by Portuguese commandants, and a similar one was found to date 20th January 1545, over 3 years after he had already left Goa. So it could have been a fake, I guess. Between the Inquisition's beginning in 1561 and its temporary abolition in 1774, around 16,000 persons were charged before the Inquisition. Most of the Goa Inquisition's records were burnt by the Portuguese when the Inquisition was abolished in 1812. It is therefore impossible to know the exact number of those put on trial and the punishments they were given. The few records that have survived suggest that at least 57 were executed for their religious crime, and another 64 were burnt in effigy because they had already died in jail before sentencing. Gosh. Wow. So cruel. So you get you get thrown in prison because you were accused of apostatizing, and then if you died in prison, they would still burn you in effigy before you were sentenced. It is estimated that by the end of the 17th century, the Christianization of Goa meant that there were less than 20,000 people who were non-Christian out of the total Goan population of 2,050,000. From the 1590s onwards, the Goan Inquisition was the most intense. Offerings to local deities and so on, which were perceived as witchcraft, became the central focus of the Inquisition in the East in the 17th century. In Goa, the Inquisition also prosecuted violators in observing Hindu or Muslim rituals or festivals and persons who interfered with Portuguese attempts to convert non-Christians to Catholicism. The Inquisition laws made reconversion to Hinduism, Islam and Judaism and the use of the indigenous Konkani language and Sanskrit a criminal offence. Poor Alf and his ancestors. Although the Goa Inquisition ended in 1812, discrimination against Hindus under the Portuguese Christian rule continued in other forms, such as the Zenti tax, implemented in 1705 to 1840, which was similar to the jizya tax. Okay, I read that, I know. Well, you have a reasonably good idea of the methods they used. Let's find out a bit more about the methods. It's a whole list of stuff. No such thing as freedom of belief under Christian empires. Prior to authorizing of the Inquisition office in Goa in 1560, King John III of Portugal issued an order on the 8th March 1546 to forbid Hinduism, destroy Hindu temples, prohibit the public celebration of Hindu feasts, expel Hindu priests and severely punish those who created any Hindu images in Portuguese possessions in India. A special religious tax was imposed before 1550 on Muslim mosques within Portuguese territory. Records suggest that a new Christian was executed by the Portuguese in 1539 for the religious crime of heretical utterances. A Jewish converso or Christian convert named Geronimo Dias was garroted and burnt at the stake in Goa by the Portuguese for the religious heresy of Judaizing in 1543 before the Goa Inquisition tribunal was formed. Now, Judaizing is the process of cultural assimilation in which a person or a demographic group acquires Jewish cultural and religious beliefs and values. I guess that's more Noahidizing, I think. So it was legal for you to be a Noahide. It's just really shocking, isn't it? The burnt and bloody history of Christianity. And I think it's rather sad that Ralph is just continuing with, his what do you call it? Stockholm Syndrome. Hello, Aaron. I don't know if you're still there. But this should be of interest to everyone, really. Well, anyone with an interest in history. The beginning of the Inquisition. Cardinal Enrique of Portugal sent someone with a name I can't pronounce, Alexo Diaz Falcao, as the first inquisitor and established the first tribunal, the Goa Inquisition Office. Oh my goodness. Imagine just, calling your place the Inquisition Office. Was housed in the former palace of Sultan Adil Shah. Various orders issued by the Goa Inquisition included all Qadis were ordered out of Portuguese territory in 1567. Non-Christians were forbidden from occupying any public office, and only a Christian could hold such an office. Hindus were forbidden from producing any Christian devotional objects or symbols. Hindu children whose father had died were required to be handed over to the Jesuits for conversion to Christianity. Well, I suppose we can think of one of Ralph's ancestors being handed over to the Jesuits for conversion to Christianity. Hindu women who converted to Christianity could inherit all of the property of their parents. But they couldn't as Hindus, so they targeted the women. Hindu clerks in all village councils were replaced by Christians. Christian freeholders could make village decisions without any Hindu freeholders present. However, Hindu freeholders could not make any village decision unless all Christian freeholders were present. In Goan villages with Christian majorities, Hindus were forbidden from attending village assemblies. Well, talk about social exclusion. Christian members were to sign first on any proceedings, Hindus later. In legal proceedings, Hindus were unacceptable as witnesses. Only statements from Christian witnesses were admissible. Hindu temples were demolished in Portuguese Goa, and Hindus were forbidden from building new temples or repairing old ones. A temple demolition squad of Jesuits were formed which actively demolished pre-16th century temples, with a 1569 royal letter recording that all Hindu temples in Portuguese colonies in India have been demolished and burnt down. Hindu priests were forbidden from entering Portuguese Goa to officiate Hindu weddings. Oh, that's pretty mean, huh? Sephardic Jews living in Goa, many of whom had fled the Iberian Peninsula to escape the excesses of the Spanish Inquisition, were also persecuted in case they or their ancestors had fraudulently converted to Christianity. The narrative of Da Fonseca describes the violence and brutality of the Inquisition. The records speak of the demand for hundreds of prison cells to accommodate the accused. From 1560 to 1774, a total of 16,172 persons were tried by the tribunals of the Inquisition, while it also included individuals of different nationalities. The overwhelming majority, nearly 3/4, were natives, almost equally represented by Catholics and non-Christians. Many were hauled out for crossing the border and cultivating lands there. According to Benton, between 1561 and 1623, the Goa Inquisition brought 3,800 cases. There was a large number given that the total population of Goa was about 60,000 in the 1580s, with an estimated Hindu population then about a third of 20,000. 71 autos de fe were recorded. That's when the crowd witnessed the grand spectacle of public penance, often followed by convicted individuals being variously punished up to and including burning at the stake. In the first 5 years alone, over 44,000 people were arrested. According to Mercado, in its 2.5 centuries of existence in Goa, the Inquisition burned 57 people to death at the stake, and 64 in effigy, of whom 105 were men and 16 were women. The sentence of burning in effigy was applied to those convicted in absentia or who had died in prison. In the latter case, their remains were burnt in a coffin at the same day as the effigy, which was hung up for public display. Others sentenced to various punishments in total 4,046, of whom 3,034 were men and 1,012 were women. According to the Cronista di Tisuari, Chronicles of Tisuari, the last auto de fe was held in Goa on 7th February 1773. I find it quite interesting, but I've got 3 people now. Yes, I can see the brain dead Viho cheering that sort of thing. It's one of the reasons why white people hate Christianity. We don't seem to understand. That's why it can't work. Because once you lose the will to do this sort of thing, then people will just disbelieve. I think Vihu is George, isn't he? So this is what Ralph's ancestors were subject to, something to bear in mind. Implementation and consequences. An appeal to start the Inquisition in the Indian colonies of Portugal was sent by Vicar General Miguel Vaz. According to Indo-Portuguese historian Teotonio de Sousa, the original request targeted the Moors, Muslims, New Christians and the Hindus, and it made Goa a centre of persecution operated by the Portuguese. The colonial administration, under demands of the Jesuits and Church Provincial Council of Goa in 1567, enacted anti-Hindu laws to end what the Catholics considered to be heretical conduct and to encourage conversions to Christianity. Laws were passed banning Christians from keeping Hindus in their employ, and the public worship of Hindus were deemed unlawful. Hindus were forced to assemble periodically in churches to listen to the Christian doctrine or the criticism of their religion. Hindu books in Sanskrit and Marathi were burnt by the Goan Inquisition. It also forbade Hindu priests from entering Goa to officiate Hindu weddings. Violations resulted in various forms of punishment to non-Catholics, such as fines, public flogging, banishment to Mozambique, imprisonment, execution, burning at stakes, or burning in effigy under the orders of the Christian Portuguese persecutors at the Auto da Fe. The Inquisition forced Hindus to flee Goa in large numbers, and later the migration of its Christians and Muslims from Goa to the surrounding regions that were not in the control of the Jesuits and Portuguese India. The Hindus responded to the destruction of their temples by recovering the images from the ruins of their older temples and using them to build temples just outside the borders of the Portuguese-controlled territories. In some cases where the Portuguese built churches on the spot of the destroyed temples, where Hindus started annual processions that carry their gods and goddesses, linking their newer temples to the site where the churches stand after the Portuguese colonial era ended. Persecution of Hindus. Hindus were the primary target for persecution and punishment for their faith by the Catholic prosecutors of the Goan Inquisition. About 74% of those sentenced were charged with crypto-Hinduism, while others targeted were non-Hindus, such as the 1.5% sentence for being crypto-Muslims, 1.5% for obstructing the operations of the Holy Office of the Inquisition. Most records of the nearly 250 years of Inquisition trials were burnt by the Portuguese after the Inquisition was banned. Those that have survived, such as those between 1782 to 1800, state that people continued to be tried and punished, and the victims were predominantly the Hindus. A large proportion of those arrested, tried and sentenced during the Goa Inquisition, according to Antonio José Saraiva, came from the lowest social strata. The trial records suggest that the victims were not exclusively Hindus, but included members of other religions found in India, as well as some Europeans. I guess they weren't being racist about it. Friar Diogo da Borba and his advisor Vicar General Miguel Vaz followed the missionary goals to convert the Hindus. In cooperation with the Jesuit and Franciscan missionaries, the Portuguese administration in Goa and military were deployed to destroy the cultural and institutional roots of Hindus and other Indian religions. For example, Viceroy and Captain General Antonio de Noronha and later Captain General Constantino de Sá de Noronha systematically destroyed Hindu and Buddhist temples in Portuguese possessions, and during attempted new conquests on the Indian subcontinent. Exact data on the nature and number of Hindu temples destroyed by the Christian missionaries and Portuguese governments are unavailable. Some 160 temples were razed to the ground on Goa Island by 1566. Between 1566 and 1567, a campaign by Franciscan missionaries destroyed another 300 Hindu temples in Bardez, in North Goa. In Salsette, South Goa, approximately 300 Hindu temples were destroyed by the Christian officials of the Inquisition. Numerous Hindu temples were destroyed elsewhere at Asolna and Cancolim by Portuguese authorities. A 1569 royal letter in Portuguese archives records that all Hindu temples in its colonies in India have been burnt and razed to the ground. According to Ulrich Lehner, Goa had been a tolerant place in the 16th century, but the Goan Inquisition had turned it into a hostile location for Hindus and members of other Asian religions. Temples had been razed, public Hindu rituals forbidden, and conversions to Hinduism severely punished. The Goa Inquisition prosecuted harshly any cases of public Hindu worship. Over 3/4 of its cases pertained to this, and only 2% to apostasy or heresy. New laws promulgated between 1566 and 1576 prohibited Hindus from repairing any damaged temples or constructing new ones. Okay, I think we've said that before. Persecution of Buddhists. And Catholics are also persecuted. It's shocking, really. The Goa Inquisition led to the destruction of Buddhist sacred objects seized in Portuguese attacks in South Asia. In 1560, for example, an armada led by Viceroy Constantino de Braganza attacked Tamils in northeast Sri Lanka. They seized a reliquary with Buddha's tooth, preserved as sacred and called Dalada by the local Tamils since the 4th century. Diogo de Couto, the late 16th century Portuguese chronicler in Goa, refers to the relic as a monkey's tooth. Oh dear. As well as the Buddha's tooth. The monkey term being a common racial insult for the collective identity of South Asians. In most European accounts of that era, Christian authors call it monkey's or ape's tooth, while some call it tooth of the demon or tooth of the holy man. In a few accounts, such as that of the Portuguese chronicler Faria de Souza, the tooth is called a genuine satanic source of evil that had to be destroyed. The tooth's capture by the Portuguese spread rapidly in South Asia, and the king of Pegu offered a fortune to Portuguese in exchange for it. However, the religious authorities of the Goa Inquisition prevented the acceptance of ransom and held a flamboyant ceremony to publicly destroy the tooth as a means of humiliation and religious cleansing. According to Hannah, the monkey word became a racialized insult in the proceedings, but it may initially have been a product of conflation of Hinduism and Buddhism, given the fact that the Buddha tooth relic was preserved and considered sacred by Tamil Hindus in Jaffna, and these Hindus also worshipped Hanuman. To the Portuguese Inquisition officials and their European supporters, the term projected their stereotypes for the lands and people they had violently conquered, as well as their prejudices against Indian religions. Persecution of Jews. Goa was a sanctuary for Jews who had been forcibly converted to Christianity on the Iberian Peninsula. These forcibly baptized converts were known as New Christians. They lived in what then became to be known as the Jew Street. The New Christian population was so substantial that, as Savaira reveals in a letter which is dated 18th February 1519, King Manuel I promoted legislation henceforth prohibiting the naming of New Christians to the position of judge, town councillor or municipal registrar in Goa, stipulating, however, that those already appointed were not to be dismissed. This shows that even during the first 9 years of Portuguese rule, Goa had a considerable influx of recently baptized Spanish and Portuguese Jews. However, after the start of the Goa Inquisition, the Viceroy issued an order that banned Jews from entering the Portuguese territories in India, and violators liable to the penalties of arrest, seizure of their property, and confinement in a prison. The Portuguese built city fortifications walls between 1564 and 1568 and ran adjacent to the Jew Street, but placed it outside of the fort. The Inquisition originally targeted New Christians, that is, Jews who had been forcibly converted to Christianity and who migrated from Portugal to India between 1505 and 1560. Later it added in Moors, a term that meant Muslims who had previously invaded the Iberian Peninsula from Morocco. In Goa, the Inquisition included Jews, Muslims, and later predominantly Hindus. A documented case of the persecution of the Jews, New Christians, that began a few years before the inauguration of the Goa Inquisition was that of a Goan woman, Caldera. Her trial contributed to formal launch of Goa Inquisition Office. Caldera and 19 other New Christians were arrested by the Portuguese and brought before the tribunal in 1557. They were charged with Judaizing, visiting synagogues, and eating unleavened bread. She was also accused of celebrating Purim festival coincident with the Hindu festival of Holi, wherein she was alleged to have burnt dolls symbolic of Philno, of son of Haman. Ultimately, all of them were sent from Goa to Lisbon to be tried by the Portuguese Inquisition. There, she was sentenced to death. The persecution of Jews extended to Portuguese territorial claims in Cochin. Their synagogue was destroyed by the Portuguese. The Kerala Jews rebuilt the synagogue in 1568. And this is the last one, I think. Persecution of Goan Catholics. It's like, you've converted them to Catholicism and you're still persecuting them? The Inquisition considered those Hindus who had converted to Catholicism but continued to observe their former Hindu customs and cultural practices heretics. The Catholic missionaries aimed to eradicate indigenous languages such as Konkani and cultural practices such as ceremonies, fasting, growing of the tulsi plant in front of the house, the use of flowers and leaves for ceremony or ornament. Oh, thank goodness. There were other far-reaching changes that took place during the Portuguese occupation. Those changes included the prohibition of traditional musical instruments and the prohibition of singing of celebratory verses, which were replaced with Western music. People were renamed when they converted, and they were not permitted to use their original Hindu names. Alcohol was introduced and dietary habits changed dramatically so that foods which were once taboo, such as pork, which is shunned by Muslims, and beef, which is shunned by some Hindus, became part of the Goan diet. Nevertheless, many Goan Catholics continued to observe some of their old cultural practices and Hindu customs. Some of those accused of crypto-Hinduism were condemned to death. Such circumstances forced many to leave Goa and settle in their neighbouring kingdoms, of which a minority were the Deccan, and the vast majority went to Kanara. As the persecution increased, missionaries complained that the Brahmins continued to perform the Hindu religious rites, and Hindus defiantly increased their public religious ceremonies. This defiance by the Hindus, alleged the missionaries, motivated the recently converted Goan Catholics to participate in Hindu ceremonies and relapse into Hinduism. In addition, there was a hypocritical difference between the preaching and the practicing of the Portuguese who were living in Goa. The Portuguese Christians and many clergymen were gambling, spending extravagantly, practicing public concubinage, extorting money from the Indians, and engaging in sodomy and adultery. The bad examples of Portuguese Catholics were not universal, and there were also good examples in which some Portuguese Catholics offered medical care to the Goan Catholics who were sick. However, the good examples were not strong enough when they were contrasted with the bad examples, and the Portuguese betrayed their belief in their cultural superiority and their assumptions that Hindus, Muslims, and barbarians and pagans did not possess virtues and goodness. In the later decades of the 250-year period of the Goa Inquisition, the Portuguese Catholic clergy discriminated against the Indian Catholic clergy because its members were the children of previously converted Catholic parents. The Goan Catholics were referred to as black priests, and they were stereotyped as being ill-natured and ill-behaved by their very nature, lascivious, drunkards, etc., and based on these stereotypes they were considered most unworthy to receive the charges of the churches in Goa. Friars who did not want to lose their careers and promotions alleged that, unlike proper Europeans, those who grew up as native Catholics hated white-skinned people because they were suffering from the diabolic vice of pride. These racist accusations were used as grounds to keep the parishes and institutions of the clergy in Goa under the monopoly of the Portuguese Catholics, rather than allow native Goan Catholics to rise in their ecclesiastical careers based on their merits. And then there's a heading about the suppression of the Konkani language. And they also persecuted other Christians. This is the final paragraph. In 1599, I can't be bothered to read it. Yeah, but it's pretty oppressive, isn't it? Anyway, I'll read this one. The Goa Inquisition also persecuted non-Portuguese Christian missionaries and physicians, such as those missionaries and physicians who were from France. In the 16th century, the Portuguese clergy became jealous of a French priest who was operating in Madras. They lured him to Goa, then they had him arrested and sent to the Inquisition. The French priest was saved when the Hindu king of Karnataka kingdom interceded on his behalf by laying siege to Saint until the priest was released. Yeah, it's pretty oppressive. Anyway, you get the idea. Yeah, that's I'm going to try out. I mean, the whole purpose really is to try out my sound levels. So can you? I'm low. I'm raising the sound level, and I'm lowering it, and then I'm raising the sound level. And that's it. Thank you all for coming.